Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. What you're going to hear today is the culmination of countless hours of work from a dedicated staff, members of the Cabinet, General Assembly, other independent stakeholders, and of course, the Governor. We listened with a deep level of respect to all of our colleagues in the General Assembly, who also worked so hard to present their recommendations for our budget. We think we've landed on a common ground to invest in the collective priorities of the Commonwealth. So leading off today's presentation, please welcome to the stage your 74th Governor of the Commonwealth, Glenn Youngkin.
Thank you all. Thank you. Wow, there's a lot of you here. One might think we're talking about funding. Please sit down, please. I'm sorry you don't have a chair, for those of you that don't. I first want to thank everybody for attending today, and I would like to wish everybody a good afternoon. We are today very pleased to talk about finding common ground. That's what today is about, and that's what our work ahead of us is about. And so I want to thank members of the General Assembly who are here. I also want to thank folks that are watching on the live feed, because I know folks were spread around the Commonwealth today. I want to thank our friends who are representing so many different interests across the Commonwealth for coming today, agency heads, department heads, and of course the tremendous work that our Cabinet has done over the last 30 days. And boy, has it been a busy 30 days. Today I am very proud to present and release the package of amendments that come together to form a common ground budget. It demonstrates our commitment, not as Republicans and Democrats, not as House and Senate members or a governor, but as Virginians working together to deliver for Virginians. It also, I believe, enables us to keep our collective promises to the people of the Commonwealth. We know this. Our Commonwealth is diverse, and we all represent a vast array of voices and priorities. And over the course of this process, we have had an opportunity to listen. We've had an opportunity to engage in dialogue. We've had an opportunity to show respect for each other's perspectives and priorities. And that has been critically important. You see, we all bring different experiences, unique perspectives. And I want to thank all of the members of our conference committee for the work that they have done. But I particularly want to thank Chairwoman Lucas and Chairman Torian. They ran a very good conference process. We have disagreements over pieces of the budget, but I want to thank them for constantly focusing on the needs of Virginians and, of course, the professionalism to do it on time. See, budget process work is hard, but with that, we have the opportunity to see and hear one another, to understand those priorities, and yes, to compromise and to find common ground that will enable us to unleash the next chapter of Virginia's future. And that is what they hired us to do. I believe that this package of amendments that we're presenting today can achieve all of that and get us there on time with a budget that is clean, without tax increases, and yes, a bit frustrating to me, no tax decreases. But that is what finding common ground is all about. And when we do this, we can present a budget today that is structurally balanced and keeps Virginia on a winning path. You see, in our first 2 years together, we, the General Assembly and our administration, and support and help from so many of all of you, we were able to pass and sign 2 bipartisan budgets. 2 bipartisan budgets that included the largest tax relief packages in the history of our Commonwealth, but also record investment in education and in law enforcement and behavioral health and conserving God's gifts to Virginia. We were able to do both. And so I constantly want to remind us that this pursuit of both and opportunities consistently presents itself when we search for it. And here we are again with a both and opportunity as opposed to an either or. Now, we did all of that together, and the result of the work that we have done is that Virginia is financially stronger than she has ever been. Without a doubt. We are among states with a AAA bond rating. But among that short list of 15, we are number 3 because our revenue and rainy day reserve funds are so robust. We, in fact, have 200,000 more people working today than we did just 2 years ago, with more Virginians working than ever in the history of the Commonwealth. And of course, when you have record job numbers with rising wages, it translates into record receipts for the Commonwealth. This is not a difficult process to understand. It is one that is driving Virginia's success, which translates into government's ability to invest in our future. See, this financial strength is built on a basic truth that when Virginians do well, state government does well. And that is at the heart. You see, just 6 years ago, at the start of the 2019-2020 biennium, and could we slide forward one slide, please? At the start of the 2019-2020 biennium, the state government general funds fueling operating appropriations totaled $43.7 billion over the biennium. The Common Ground budget funds $63.2 billion, a 45% increase, funded not by tax increases, but funded by job growth, wage growth, and economic expansion. This is a model that is sustainable and, in fact, leans in to growth. And this is happening at a time when other states who have fallen behind in job growth, states like California and New York and Maryland, are now having to revert to tax increases rather than to be able to rely on the strength of their economic model. Meanwhile, Virginia is seeing strength in our economic drivers and therefore in our state government revenues. The economic strength has enabled, has fueled, has been the foundation to this 45% increase. Back up one for me, please. To this 45% increase in state revenues over the past 5 years. Let me put this into context. It's $9.1 billion in the last 5 years of increased state revenue. It reflects strength across every aspect of individual taxpayers, corporate taxpayers, consumption. This is broad-based strength in Virginia's tax base. That is why we find ourselves at a both-and moment instead of an either-or. Just like in the previous two bipartisan budgets, we can invest in education a record amount. We can invest in behavioral health and human resources a record amount. We can invest in law enforcement. We can invest in transportation. We can invest in conserving our environment. We can invest in our vets. It is not a moment where we have to say we can't, because it is a moment that says we can, because job growth and economic strength translate into state resources. Now let me be clear. I believe strongly that Virginia could also be reforming and reducing the tax burdens that are on Virginians today. I'm committed to continue to find ways to reduce the tax burdens on Virginians. In the introduced budget that I presented back in December, I had a full tax reform package, and it netted into $1 billion of tax relief for Virginians needed. And again, we have seen the benefits of investing in allowing Virginians to keep more of their hard-earned money in their pockets. Fewer people move away, more people come, there's more jobs, and that economic cycle drives state revenues. But to be clear, in a moment where we are finding common ground, I believe the first step to that common ground is recognizing that we have to make a decision together. And I will propose today that that decision together is that we do not fight over tax decreases, but we also recognize it's not time, nor will it ever be, for tax increases that will interrupt this economic model that is working so well. And I believe that's the first place where we come together and find common ground. It's time for us to look to places where we can agree, as opposed to looking to places where we disagree. As I said, each of us brings a very important perspective. Yes, there are different budget priorities. There are regional needs and local needs. But Virginia's foundation of financial strength enables us to run to these issues and solve them collectively, as opposed to run to corners and argue about them. And so, as I came to this process, I listened, and we collectively agree that there are core collective priorities that we need to meet. First, fueling the future with record investment in education. And to be clear, at the heart of that is paying our teachers competitively with a 3% pay raise in 2025 and a 3% pay raise in 2026. We must serve those who are in need. And our largest budget portion is, of course, in health and human resources. And there is broad, collective, shared priorities on this front. We can fund creating more jobs and building a workforce and investing in safer communities and connecting Virginians both in broadband and in transportation. Yes, we need to continue to fund the conservation of our amazing natural resources, and we can serve our veterans. Yes, we can meet the collective priorities of all of these. We can also meet the collective priorities of many regional interests and local priorities. Many of our legislative colleagues have a particular project that is really important in their jurisdiction or with their constituencies. And we have worked to make sure that those priorities that were reflected in the conference report budget continue to be funded in our budget that finds common ground. To be clear, we do not need new taxes. And again, in the sake of finding common ground, we won't aim to reduce them this time. It's structurally balanced, and it can be delivered on time. This is where common ground is found. You will hear details about every aspect of this budget. My colleagues will take you on a pretty deep dive, but let me hit a couple of the high points. First, total spending over the biennium is $64 billion. As I said, that is an extraordinary amount of money. It's an extraordinary responsibility to make sure that we are, in fact, great stewards of the resources of this Commonwealth. There is a very large package of amendments, over 200, that first remove tax increases from the budget, both the sales and use tax increases and the increase in taxes on Virginians' electricity bills from the Reggie tax. This budget allows us to invest a record $21.2 billion in K through 12 education. Secretary Godero will put that into context. But folks, that's $5.5 billion more than the biennium 2 times ago. We can increase our funding in higher education by $1 billion. We can increase funding for health and human resources by $3.2 billion. As I said, there's 3% teacher pay raises and 3% state employee pay raises each year. We've worked to come up with language to mirror the increased investment in higher ed with a commitment to keep tuition increases at no more than 3% the next 2 years. We fully fund Virginia's share in the metro operating shortfall. And of course, one last thing is that we do provide toll relief in Hampton Roads and additional funding for I-81. Friends, this is a budget that finds common ground. Now, common ground means that we affirm the importance of world-class quality education. It means that we allow Virginians to keep more of their hard-earned money in their pockets. We have to be prepared to continue to create jobs and train the workforce for those great jobs, to invest in safe communities, to make sure that Virginians can find the resources they need when they need them. They can find the right help right now, and that the rest of the many priorities are actually collectively supported. This allows Virginia to win. It allows us to compete. It allows us to fulfill our promises and our obligations. And most importantly, I think it makes Virginia the best place to live and work and raise a family. This clean budget sincerely tries to meet a vast array of priorities across the Commonwealth, represented by senators and delegates, represented by Republicans and Democrats, represented by local leaders, represented by the amazing folks that work in our administration. This is based on a clear recognition that when we bring these experiences together, Virginia, in fact, wins. This budget process is one of expressing those collective priorities. And I think that we have given every ounce of our professional and personal capabilities to try to deliver that. I think it puts us in a position to celebrate both and to reject either or. We are one Virginia. You know, as we move towards our 250th anniversary of our nation, we have an opportunity to do as Virginians something that Virginians have always done, and that's to lead. We have an opportunity to demonstrate what it means to collaborate, to compromise, to find common ground. And I think we have the opportunity to demonstrate that this amazing American experiment works. And it all started here in Virginia, and we can continue to demonstrate that it continues in Virginia. I'm always struck by e pluribus unum. Out of many, one. And so it is this partnership that we have, this partnership with the General Assembly, this partnership that's represented by the rest of the statewide elective leadership, those in Congress, the Lieutenant Governor, the Attorney General. It is this partnership with the members of our cabinet. It's this partnership with all of those that work so hard for particular groups. This is what makes it work. And as long as we keep our eyes on common values, a common future, and common ground, we will be united. And Virginia will continue to be amazing. So let's go to work. Get your pens out, pad of paper, and here comes the details. Secretary Cummings will start us off with our resource backdrop and bridging how we got from here to there, followed by Secretary Gadara, who will take us on a deep dive in education, followed by Secretary Littell, who will take us on a deep dive in the world of health and human resources. And finally, we have asked Deputy Secretary of Finance, Jason Powell, to have the toughest job, and that's to wrap up everything else. And so I would like to invite Secretary Steve Cummings to come and start us on this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. If we could go ahead and move to the first slide, I am going to give you a little walkthrough on where we stand, resources, and outlook. So, as you know, when I regularly speak in front of the money committees, we talk about our prudent outlook for the future. It's our job to lay out a course that is conservative, plan for problems, and hope for something better. And I think as a result of that, we tend to throw some shade on what's really going on in Virginia. We point out a lot of risks. I think this chart shows you that that shade covers up what we all know is true, that we have tremendous momentum in Virginia, consistently exceeded our expectations. You can see since the beginning of 2022, calendar beginning, we are the number 7 state in the country in job growth. Amongst the states that we regularly compare ourselves to our south, our competitor states, we are number 3. On the right-hand side, you can see the stats where we are showing that we have by far the largest labor force in the history of Virginia, and our recovery rate is now at a level that it was last seen back in 2012. Next slide, please. This is a stunning chart here. This is the status of our money in the bank, rainy day funds as a percent of expenditures for the states that are rated AAA by all 3 rating agencies, of which there are 15. You can see back in 2019 fiscal year, we were second from last with only 4% of our resources available in that backstop. And we have gone to number 3. No other state has done anything like that. That has come from us prioritizing people for ourselves, prioritizing this and making sure those deposits were made at the expense of other things. And as a result of that, we're in phenomenal shape as number 3 amongst that very important group that really paves the way for everybody else. I look at this and I think back to pandemic at the end of FY 2019, going into the pandemic, to see that kind of money in the bank. I think a lot of people were sweating pretty heavily, not knowing what was going to happen. Obviously, the government responded It wasn't the problem people thought it was going to be. It was a scary place to be, though. Next slide. If you look at actually the numbers behind that, you can see the left-hand side, the actual dollar growth. It was only $700 million back in FY 2019. We have $4.6 billion sitting in an account within Treasury and earning interest, standing by. And on the right-hand side, these are NGF balances across the entire Commonwealth. So this is every agency, every authority, resources that are in their accounts, some of it obligated, some of it not. It just shows you the sheer magnitude of liquidity within the Commonwealth that gives us so much financial flexibility versus where we were back in 2019. Really important, in February 2024, this is the last credit rating report that came out. This was Fitch with respect to a financing that was underway. You can see Virginia is well positioned to absorb any budgetary challenges related to current economic uncertainties without fundamentally altering its long-term credit profile. We're in phenomenal shape to do thoughtful planning, and we don't eliminate that risk from the picture, but we know we have a lot of backstop and we can sleep well at night. Next page. Governor showed you a bigger picture of the annual growth. This is just an update. Actually, you'll hear March results next week. So this is on February. And you can see that versus prior year, our collections are 6.3% ahead of last year. But this is a chart that shows how we're performing relative to projections. And there's a lot of numbers in here. I want to draw you down to the lower right-hand side that shows you the variance versus projections for total general fund revenues is $827 million positive, 4.9%. If you take out non-withholding and refunds, for those of you who listen to Money Committee reports, you're aware of the PTET, which has created some confusion amongst our revenues. So if we just take that completely out of the picture, we're still $339 million ahead of our forecast through February. So the way we think about this, because of the uncertainty of PTET, it's somewhere between $339 million and $828 million. That is outperformance. Our advice has been, let's not touch that. There's variability in PTET. We do have uncertainties about where we're going. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let's just leave it in the bank, and we'll deal with it later. Next page, please. This is to show you how our forecast is based upon our prudent assumptions. We are going to continue to maintain the cautious stance on our projections going forward. I think you hear more and more today the mixed signals that the Fed is seeing, and they're reserving action based upon that. That's become the market narrative. So we have maintained that position. We will continue to. And in fact, built into this this projection, we have built in a recession, mild recession, that will begin in the next 6 months and would continue for 6 to 9 months thereafter. That means real job decline. If you look at the chart in 2023, if we had not implemented the tax policy actions that affected 2023, revenues would have been $30 million, continued growth, and in 2024, they would be 30.1, down slightly as we see the beginnings of a slowdown. If you then go to the numbers that are below that, 27.9, 28.9 goes down to 27.9, that is actual, and our projection for this year is 27.8, and then it goes back up to 28.6. So our budget is obviously dependent on this level of resources, and you'll see in a minute that it is structurally balanced. Next slide. So here is where you see it, structurally balanced. This shows the executive amended budget is balanced. Projected sources of funds are more than adequate to support the proposed appropriations. If you go in each column, you'll see the carryover of prior year balances. FY 2024 would result in a resource less appropriations of $2.4 billion, which becomes the beginning balance on FY 2025. Then you see revenue sources. You see then below of $32,165,000, GF appropriations of $32,160,000 for 5.2 excess. Track that into 2026. You're at 6.4 for a combined surplus for those 2 years projected to be 11.6. We are balanced. Next page. So here's the tracker. The left-hand side of this, that is the net change in resources due to the elimination of tax policy. Okay, that's the gap between conference. If you go to the next column, this is now how we are creating capacity. This is actually reduction, or utilization of bonding for more of bonding for CapEx. It also, within our CapEx budget, there were a number of items that were in the budget that had not been planned for, and we, as a matter of policy, do not provide funding unless planning has taken place. Those two items account for over $300 million of that. If you go into the next column, which is NGF swaps, this is where we've been able to take some of the excess balances in certain accounts on the balance sheet that were not obligated and apply those balances against some of our spending requirements. Example of that, main example would be $150 million for out of literary fund, and also some funds that are available to provide for the funding of WMATA. So you end up with a gap of $670 million. To put that in context, this is over a 2-year period, that is less than 1% of the $64 billion in the biennial budget. We are not that far apart. So then we start looking at what is it that we are, how are we achieving and closing that. You've got, the next column is $169 million. This is taxes proceeds that would have come from the increased sales and use taxes, which will no longer be available. That's $169 million. You then have the K through 12 paring back of policy. That's some reductions in at-risk English language learners, early childhood. The next column is reductions in higher ed, which are reductions within affordable access. And then the last is legislative action and other, and that would primarily be around minimum wage. So the net result is the closing of the gap of $670 million. If you go to the next page, in education, this shows you, and Secretary Gadara is going to go into this in much greater detail. Chapter 1 of 18.5, the conference report was at almost $20 billion of general fund investment. And then you go to the far right, and you can see from that, the reductions are using $150 million from the literary fund to relieve some of the teacher retirement required deposit, $169 million coming from the tax distributions, the obligations out of that, and then other adjustments in K through 12 policy pending the SOQ funding formula reform work that's going to be done. We are not far apart. I think we have a great story here, and this is a very accomplishes the goals in making sure that we are truly working in partnership to come to common ground. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Secretary Gadara.
Thank you, Secretary Cummings. So as you just heard, Virginia's economy is strong. And for Virginia to continue to be vibrant, we must invest in her people. This means restoring excellence education for every learner in the Commonwealth. And while money alone will not meet that goal, it matters. This historic budget continues the collaborative commitment of the General Assembly and Governor Youngkin to prioritize education. This Common Ground budget is the largest education budget in the Commonwealth's history. And I want to add my thanks to those people in the room and those people at the General Assembly building who worked together to make this feat possible. Thank you. Allow me also to highlight in the next couple slides a few details, starting with our earliest learners on the next slide. This Common Ground budget maintains access across our nation-leading public-private early childhood programs at a critical moment when the one-time federal pandemic funding expires. Importantly, this new path made possible by this budget is both sound and sustainable. The early childhood investments build off the bipartisan Early Childhood Care and Education Commission and support the goals of the Building Blocks for Virginia Families Plan, which were based on those findings. This budget provides $805 million from the general fund to support Virginia's early childhood programs. It also includes $420 million increase over the biennium in general fund resources. low-income working families who currently receive public support and services continue to have access to the early childhood and after-school programs that they want. This Common Ground budget maintains $20 million for incentives that reduce teacher shortages and increase educator retention. Great teachers matter. In the last 3 years, over $1 billion has been put towards teacher compensation. The investments we've championed together are part of a broader effort to attract, to grow, and to retain the greatest teachers here in Virginia. This Common Ground budget doubles down on this progress by providing a 3% pay increase each year for teachers in the biennium. This is an additional $540 million investment. Important to note is that Virginia is projected, as you see on the slide, to exceed the national average salary teacher pay beginning this year. The Common Ground budget adds $1.2 billion of additional K-12 funding while specifically making targeted investments for our highest need students. All of our students, especially our highest need ones, are battling unprecedented learning loss. This budget provides an additional $98 million of at-risk funding each year for the next 2 years. This Common Ground budget provides over $36 million in addition to provide additional English learner teachers per student. Additions to these funding streams, however, are short-term fixes. We have more to do together to improve the K-12 funding formula to focus on students and to prioritize resources to the students and the schools who have the greatest needs. We know from the learning loss work underway with All in Virginia and our chronic absenteeism task force that great progress is happening in our classrooms, but additional investments are needed. Based on the recommendations of the bipartisan House Bill 585 task force calling for modernization of our assessment system, this Common Ground budget allocates $38 million for the implementation of new assessments to ensure families and teachers have a clear picture of where their students are on track and where they need help. The Chronic Absenteeism Task Force has also documented that when students are fed, they come to school and learning accelerates. That's why we are all aligned on the importance of increasing the per meal reimbursement by $2.5 million to increase student participation in school breakfast programs. We are also investing in school construction, redesign, career and technical programs that excite students to learn. The Common Ground budget invests over $335 million for local school construction grants and loans. And under a new law, schools can now seek school construction grants for career and technical education programs, which will expand access in all communities for pathways aligned to our highest workforce needs. We've been thrilled with the response across the Commonwealth to our lab school proposals, and the applications keep coming in. We now have 21 in the pipeline. Over 60 school divisions are part of this, as are 25 higher education partners. These schools are being built to meet the needs of our students and our communities, and just watch this space. And finally, I'd like to move on to higher education. This budget reinforces our shared commitment to keep Virginia higher education consistently rated among the strongest in the nation. We have added an additional $1 billion in higher education, investing more than $7 billion over the biennium and representing a 67% funding increase over the 2019 to 20 biennium. This Common Ground budget provides $154 million in new funding over the biennium to help minimize in-state undergraduate tuition increases. This new $154 million is conditioned on not raising tuition beyond the lesser of 3% or inflation for the next 2 years, as you heard the governor mention. We will invest $70 million to continue an initiative focused on the recruitment and retention of low-income students. And next, the Common Ground budget provides $33 million in new funding for undergraduate and graduate financial aid to help pay for college. This budget also provides $24 million in new funding to support the Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program. This includes $20 million to offset the costs of the waiver for institutions and $4 million in stipends to offset the cost of room, board, books, supplies for qualified survivors and dependents of disabled military service members. Additionally, in lieu of major eligibility changes to this critical educational assistance program, we recommend a study to ensure we listen to veterans before implementing any potential future program modifications. We are committed to keeping Virginia the most veteran-friendly state while ensuring that the VMSTEP benefit is sustainable so it remains for years to come for qualified veterans and their families. Virginia recognizes the value of our private institutions of higher education, and so we provide a total of $4 million in new funding towards students who attend private nonprofit institutions. This translates into an increase in the tuition assistance tag grants by an additional $125 per student in the first year and $250 in the second. And lastly, we are investing $1.2 million in new funding to support a regional career placement center program at Virginia's community colleges to connect students to regional employers and internships and work experiences. This common ground budget, thanks to collaborative efforts, invests in our education institutions and educators and ensures affordable access for all Virginia families to an education that will prepare all learners for success in life. Thank you very much, and it is now my pleasure to invite my colleague, Health and Human Resources Secretary John Littell, to the podium.
Thank you, Secretary Gadare, and good afternoon. As the Governor noted, this budget represents common ground between his introduced budget and the Conference Committee version. That is especially true in Health and Human Resources. The Governor's introduced budget and the Conference Committee's work focused on critical initiatives that needed both attention and funding. The amendments that are included in HHR will protect and enhance those initiatives. The Common Ground budget includes an additional $3.2 billion general fund dollars for Medicaid, social services, workforce development, state hospital and staff improvements, mental health and substance use disorder. As many of you know, in Medicaid, we have been in a federally mandated, year-long process of coming out of the pandemic. This represents another post-pandemic instance where the federal government is stepping away from its enhanced funding, and the state must step up. So with the significant reduction in federal funds, plus program changes and inflation, an additional $895 million in general fund dollars over the biennium is required for Medicaid and children's health programs. Included in that, the Governor and Money Committees worked together to add $150 million as a contingency for slightly higher than an anticipated enrollment in Medicaid. This is a fiscally appropriate and prudent step to take, even though it might reduce the ability to spend elsewhere. One key priority of the Governor and General Assembly was to eliminate the backlog in the Priority 1 wait list for individuals with developmental disabilities. These are individuals, approximately 3,440, who have been ready for services that would allow them to live independently, but cannot access them because there were no waiver slots available. This has been a priority of the Governor from the beginning of his administration, and previous budgets increased the number of slots incrementally. In his budget, he made the courageous decision to fully fund the backlog. Led by Chairman Sickles and Deeds, the General Assembly supported this effort. The Common Ground budget includes $560 million in total funds for developmental disability waivers, peer-to-peer mentoring, rental assistance, and increases for DD services and personal care attendants to grow and support the workforce. Funding for the Governor's signature behavioral health transformation, Right Help Right Now, is protected in the Common Ground budget with $169 million in total funding. Our initial focus on building out a crisis infrastructure that is desperately needed by Virginians all across the Commonwealth remains. Funding in the amount of $71 million provides support for adequate funding for additional crisis receiving centers and crisis stabilization units throughout the Commonwealth. This is on top of what we have already committed in the past year. Funding to expand mobile crisis units. You may recall that the governor set a goal to ensure that there was a team no more than an hour from every Virginian. In 2023, we reached our target and now will continue to grow this network to provide mental health and substance use disorder services to people where they are instead of a hospital. The Common Ground budget also includes $61 million to support the workforce of our 41 locally run community-based community service boards in both workforce development and staffing expenses, as well as the staff who work in our state hospitals. Other important programs like school-based mental health, healthcare loan repayment programs, and expanded graduate medical education slots are included as well. And the budget grows the needed efforts to combat the opioid crisis, especially the dangerous scourge of fentanyl, with $24 million of additional core funds. There are many other HHR areas in the Common Ground budget that reflect the needs of Virginians and also priority areas for General Assembly members. A couple of highlights include $97 million to ensure adequate funds for the Children's Services Act as we see caseload and cost increases, $34 million in increased funding to support kinship and foster care families, funding for a summer EBT program that will ensure that as many as 830 children who are in need of nutrition during the months out of school will have access to that program, $6.4 million to fund community health workers in local health departments, $7 million to begin to replace the benefits enrollment system at the Department of Social Services, which is long overdue, $12.5 million in additional general fund support for the Office of Emergency Management Services as we reorganize and rebuild the state support and services. Planning for a comprehensive child and youth psychiatric facility. And lastly, the budget retains the local programs deemed important by various members of the Assembly. HHR agencies and programs represent approximately a third of the total state budget. So these are obviously just a few important highlights. I'm confident that with this budget, we can meet our responsibilities and address the many needs and issues facing the Commonwealth. With that, I'd like to invite my colleague, Jason Powell, the Deputy Secretary of Finance, to take us through the rest of the budget.
Thank you, Secretary Littell. Turning to the rest of the budget, and I don't do nearly the credit to this row in the front row of the Cabinet Secretaries that I should do, but thank you all for allowing me to speak for your behalf. The Common Ground budget recognizes that investments in keeping Virginia's communities safe is a shared priority. It prioritizes and provides a total investment of $72.5 million over the biennium for community violence intervention programs, including $20 million for Operation Ceasefire. It embraces the dedication of $2.6 million in support to the Office of the Attorney General for his efforts in this area as well. It provides $25 million for the Safer Communities program, almost $7 million for youth community violence intervention programs, as well as $18 million for community violence intervention program. The Common Ground budget provides $49 million for school resource officers and $20 million to support additional support to local law enforcement agencies. The Common Ground budget would provide $3 million for law enforcement officer wellness programs and maintain over $40 million for a commitment to transition Lawrenceville Correctional Center to state management. It includes $13.2 million for the Department of Corrections to establish a new career progression plan for correctional officers and $3.8 million for 6 new judgeships. To complement these efforts, it provides $4.7 million in increases to Commonwealth's attorneys for paralegal positions and assistant Commonwealth's attorneys to address workload needs. And finally, for our veterans who have served the Commonwealth and our country so well, it provides $19 million for startup costs for our 2 new Veterans Care Centers coming online in this biennium. The Common Ground budget recognizes that accelerating Virginia's economy is a shared priority through investments in economic development. It provides $175 million over the biennium in investments to the Virginia Housing Trust Fund and $90 million over the biennium for strategic investments in business-ready sites. Of this, $50 million is a one-time commitment and an ongoing funding stream of $20 million in each year. It maintains the Commonwealth's commitments to economic development investments and reserves $42.5 million over the biennium to meet anticipated payments for Amazon's HQ2 project. To stimulate growth in emerging sectors of Virginia's economy, it invests $114 million in regional biotechnology and life science clusters throughout the Commonwealth. It includes $30 million to help with costs related to the make-ready work that is required in order to advance broadband infrastructure projects, and authorizes a $40 million Treasury loan to the City of Newport News to help secure federal investment of up to $400 million from the U.S. Navy to build housing infrastructure for sailors while they are stationed at the Newport News shipyard. Investing in our God-given natural resources is a spending priority that reflects our shared and common goals. Continues our progress towards meeting state water quality goals of it by investing over $350 million in nutrient reduction efforts, fully funding agricultural best management practices, providing $100 million in bond proceeds to supplement investments in wastewater treatment plants. It dedicates $50 million to the City of Richmond for continued work on its combined sewer overflow program, and provides $5 million for an innovative non-point source pollution pay-per-performance outcomes project. It provides $100 million in 2025 for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and $26.5 million to assist the City of Bristol with its landfill remediation efforts. It embraces the legislature's proposal to provide $25 million to the City of Norfolk for coastal storm risk management projects, and $20 million for capital improvements at historic sites and museums in anticipation of the semi-quincentennial celebration. It also embraces $15 million in priority investments in historic sites and battlefields that were identified by our colleagues. It removes, and as the governor stated, with respect to tax increases, it does remove language mandating Virginia rejoining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Transportation investments truly do reflect shared regional priorities, and to that end, it provides $67 million in one-time funding to expand and extend toll relief for residents of Portsmouth and Norfolk that earn less than $50,000 per year, which would provide 14 free trips weekly to those individuals through 2036. It authorizes $133.7 million in additional operating support for WMATA, first by allowing the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission to use $98 million in state funding provided in fiscal year 22 to meet the Commonwealth portion of the regional transit system's budget shortfall, as well as providing $35.7 million in general funds in fiscal year 26 to maintain that commitment. Let me be clear, the Commonwealth's position remains the local governments should continue to honor our long-standing tradition of splitting the cost of these efforts 50-50. It provides $70 million in funding to accelerate currently planned improvement projects along I-81, as well as retaining language that would dedicate $175 million in future general fund balances for deposit to the I-81 corridor improvement program. Finally, the governor's proposed budget contains capital outlay investments that continue to build on our common goals. Provides nearly $1.3 billion in general fund cash and tax-supported debt for projects. It includes $411.6 million for renovations, replacements, improvements, and other projects at state agencies and institutions of higher education across the Commonwealth, including $35 million for the demolition of the Monroe Building here on Capitol Square. There's $400 million general fund cash for maintenance reserve, $100 million in bond proceeds for improvements to wastewater treatment plants, $108.2 million for equipment for buildings that are coming online, and $250 million to supplement construction cost increases on previously authorized projects. In addition to those amounts, it provides an additional $224.2 million in non-general fund support for higher education capital outlay projects. It advances 18 projects that had been through the planning process and responsibly uses $535 million in state-supported debt consistent with pre-pandemic approach to funding capital projects. Governor. Thank you.
Jason. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Secretary Guterres. Thank you, Secretary Cummings, Secretary Littell. And again, I want to just extend my appreciation for the tremendous amount of work that has gone in to presenting a common ground budget. See, thousands of man-hours, specific questions around what a particular funding need must be, needs to be, and how to make sure that we can continue to fund it. Understanding the priorities of General Assembly members and their constituents, and making sure that as we present back a package of amendments, that it in fact does fully reflect our collective values, our collective goals, and our collective priorities. This is what the work has been, and now we actually have to continue to work. Sorry, team. Because this is just the beginning. It's a beginning to explain how we got to this proposal. And now the work is to make sure that everyone can fully understand it and see that it is a budget that seeks common ground. As reconvene is now just 9 days away, I invite our legislative colleagues and all of their teams to partner with us, to work together, just as we have done in the last 30 days and just as we have done in the last 2 years, to understand the completeness of this proposal. I look forward to those discussions. We will make available everyone in our administration to answer questions. And with that is the hope that on Wednesday, April 17th, we can pass a clean, balanced, common ground budget that truly fuels Virginia's future. I want to thank everybody again for putting on your scuba gear. And now you're going to need to go put on your eclipse glasses. If there are questions, we would love to answer them. You know how to get hold of people. The full breadth of the amendment package will be posted later today. And most importantly, we deeply appreciate everyone's love and commitment for the Commonwealth of Virginia. May God bless her. May God bless all of you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Okay, guess what time it is? Time to go to work. Thank you all.